World War II, from 1939 to 1945, was a cataclysm that devoured between 70 and 85 million lives, from the beaches of Normandy to the jungles of the Pacific. In this all-out conflict, some military roles stood out for their relentless lethality, where death was more likely than survival. Imagine a B-17 gunner, trapped in a glass turret at -40 degrees Celsius, an easy target for enemy fighters, or a merchant seaman in the Atlantic, facing torpedoes on an unarmed ship. The 10 Deadliest Jobs of World War II explores these lethal vocations, where mortality rates exceeded 50% or even 100%, roles that turned heroism into sacrifice. This book doesn't just list statistics, it brings to life the human stories behind each number, using archival footage and survivor accounts. These jobs, Japanese kamikazes, Allied paratroopers, undercover SA agents, demanded specialized skills but offered little hope. Propaganda promised glory, but the reality was brutal. A kamikaze pilot faced certain death. A merchant seaman could freeze to death within minutes of an attack. The war, with its advances like radar and bombers, amplified the horror, turning these roles into death traps. From Arctic convoys to the Himalayas, every mission was a gamble against death, where a mechanical failure or an enemy bullet could end it all. This book unravels those conditions, showing the cost of a war that consumed the bravest. The historical context is key. The Axis, Germany, Italy, Japan, sought world domination, while the Allies fought for survival. Battles like Stalingrad and D-Day defined the conflict, but the invisible jobs, merchant seamen, flamethrower operators, transport pilots, were essential, if deadly. The data is stark. Merchant seamen lost 70,000 lives. Bomber gunners faced a 60 to 70% mortality rate. These figures, backed up by military archives, conceal stories of courage and loss. Each chapter in this book revives a role, from the terror of a parachute jump to the claustrophobia of a cockpit under attack, connecting the past with the human weight of war. These men and women weren't just soldiers, they were individuals facing the impossible. An SOE agent, like Nancy Wake, lived in paranoia, knowing that one mistake meant torture. A flamethrower operator in the Pacific could become a human torch if his weapon misfired. Their letters and diaries, preserved in archives, reveal pride, fear, and longing for home. This book honors their sacrifice, not with glorification, but with truth, using CGI animation and testimonials to bring their worlds to life. Each job, from the kamikazes to the Soviet sappers, left an echo in history, a reminder of the price of freedom. Prepare for a journey to the heart of the war, where courage faced relentless statistics. Each chapter will explore a job, its risks, and the souls behind them. If you're passionate about military history or seeking to understand the human cost of World War II, this is the book for you. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share in the comments. What do you think was the worst job? Could you have survived? We begin with Issue 10, Merchant Seamen, the forgotten heroes of the Atlantic, whose cargo fueled the war, but whose fate was the bottom of the sea. Chapter 1. The U-Boat Submariners. In World War II, being a submariner meant voluntarily descending into a steel coffin, where the ocean was both your refuge and your executioner. German U-boats, under the command of Karl Donitz, and Allied submarines, such as the U.S. Navy's Gatto class, were war machines designed to lurk in the depths, but at a devastating human cost. Of the 40,000 German submariners, nearly 30,000 perished, a 75% mortality rate, the highest of any military branch. Allied submarines, though less publicized, faced similar risks. In the Pacific, 1 in 5 U-boats was sunk, with losses of 20 to 25%. These numbers weren't just statistics. They were lives trapped in steel tubes, where every mission was a gamble against water pressure, mechanical failure, and the enemy. Life on board was a claustrophobic hell, with weeks without sun, stale air, and the constant fear of a crushing end. The submariners, whether German in the Atlantic or Allied in the Pacific, shared a destiny: to live in a world where death lurked in every shadow. The interior of a U-boat was an oppressive steel labyrinth. A Type 7 U-boat, 67 meters long but only 6 meters wide, held 44 to 52 men in a space smaller than a railway carriage. Allied submarines, such as the USS Drum, were just as cramped, with compartments filled with pipes, valves, and exposed wiring. The air smelled of diesel, sweat, and stale food, with temperatures that could reach 40 degrees Celsius near the engines. Condensation dripped from the ceiling, soaking clothes and bunks. There was no privacy. Men slept in shared bunks in shifts, still warm from the previous occupant. The bathroom, a limited luxury, could only be used above ground, leaving a pervasive stench. The red light, used to preserve night vision, bathed the interior in a hellish glow, as if the ship itself were alive and breathing. Every move was a challenge, with corridors so narrow that men had to turn sideways to pass, their bodies adapting to a world designed for war, not humanity. The daily routine was an exercise in physical and mental endurance. Patrols lasted weeks, sometimes months, with no sunlight to mark time. Men worked 4-hour shifts, checking gauges, loading torpedoes, or listening for enemy signals through hydrophones. On a U-boat, silence was mandatory during deep dives to avoid detection, turning the vessel into a floating monastery where a sneeze could be fatal. On Allied submarines, conditions were similar. The crew of the USS Tang in the Pacific endured heat and humidity while stalking Japanese convoys. Food, stored in every corner, rotted over time. Moldy bread, canned meat, and powdered milk were the norm. Fresh water was rationed. Bathrooms were an impossible dream. The men clung to small rituals, a written letter, a whispered joke, to maintain their humanity in an environment that eroded it. The role of submariners was crucial, but deadly. German U-boats attacked Allied convoys in the Atlantic, sinking 14 million tons of cargo between 1940 and 1943, nearly strangling Britain. Allied U-boats, especially in the Pacific, devastated Japanese shipping, sinking 55% of its merchant fleet. But every attack was a calculated risk. A misfired torpedo could miss, alerting the enemy. On the surface, U-boats were vulnerable to aircraft and destroyers. Underwater, they relied on limited batteries that left them slow and exposed. Commanders, such as Otto Kretschmer in Germany or Sam Dealey in the US, were almost mythical figures, but even they faced uncertain fates. The pressure of leading in a space where one mistake could kill everyone was immense, and crew members relied on their judgment like a compass in the dark. U-boat technology was both a marvel and a trap. U-boats used diesel engines on the surface, reaching 17 knots, but underwater, electric motors reduced speed to 7 knots, quickly draining batteries. Allied submarines, such as the Balao class, had longer ranges but similar risks. The German snorkel, introduced in 1943, allowed batteries to be charged without fully surfacing, but it was prone to flooding. The batteries, essential for dives, could leak chlorine gas if damaged, suffocating the crew. Torpedoes, the main weapon, were temperamental. The USS Tang was sunk by its own faulty torpedo in 1944. The hull, only 2 centimeters thick in some spots, could withstand depths of up to 230 meters, but a deeper dive risked catastrophic collapse. Every system demanded constant maintenance, with crew members working in cramped spaces under constant pressure. The enemy was a relentless hunter. In the Atlantic, Allied destroyers used sonar, ASTIC, to track U-boats, dropping depth charges that shook the hull like hammers. In 1943, the Allies sank 244 U-boats, many shattered by explosions or trapped on the bottom. In the Pacific, U-boats faced Japanese destroyers and patrol aircraft, with sea mines adding an unseen danger. Depth charges could fracture pipes, flood compartments, or shut down vital systems. Crews, silent during these hunts, listened to the sonar ping like a death beat, each explosion a reminder of their fragility. Survivors described the terror of waiting, their hulls groaning and air growing thin, knowing there was no escape. The submariners' tactics were bold but risky. U-boats used the lone wolf tactic or coordinated packs, attacking convoys at night to maximize damage and escape underwater. In the Pacific, Allied submarines stalked merchant routes, sinking ships with torpedoes fired from periscopes. But each attack exposed the submarine. A flash in the water, a rumble of an engine, and the destroyers responded with fury. The Allies' breaking of the Enigma code in 1942 changed the game, allowing U-boats to be ambushed. In the Pacific, The Japanese improved their anti-submarine tactics, making each mission more dangerous. The submariners lived in a precarious balance, hunters who could become prey in seconds. The human cost was devastating. On the U-boats, only 10,000 of 40,000 survived, many as prisoners. U-boats like U-47, lost with Gunther Preen in 1941, vanished without a trace. In the Pacific, the USS Wahoo, commanded by Dudley Morton, was sunk with all hands in 1943. Letters found on wrecks, like those from U-166 in the Gulf of Mexico, speak of fear and longing, written in stolen moments. Allied submariners faced smaller, but still tragic, losses. 52 American submarines were lost, with 3,500 men. Each sinking was a tragedy, a team of brothers trapped in a steel coffin, suffocating or crushed by the pressure of the ocean. Life on board shaped the submariners' psyches. The lack of sunlight was disorienting, turning time into a blur. The constant drone of the engines and the creaking of the hull were a reminder of their vulnerability. The men developed a sixth sense for the ship's sounds, a normal groan, a suspicious creak. Camaraderie was their anchor. They shared jokes, cigarettes, stories from home, knowing that each mission could be their last. But the isolation also fueled tensions, with nerves running on edge in spaces where there was no escape. Survivors, like those on the USS Tang, spoke of recurring nightmares, the echo of sonar haunting them long after the war. The ocean itself was an adversary. Covering 70% of the Earth, it offered cover, but also danger. Currents could blow a submarine off course, storms could damage the hull. The pressure at 200 meters could crush a ship if a welder made a mistake. Allied U-boats and submarines relied on precise dives, but a miscalculation could leave them trapped on the bottom. The cold of the Atlantic or the heat of the Pacific added misery, with crews shivering or sweating in their bunks. The ocean didn't take sides, but it punished mercilessly, its indifference a constant reminder of human frailty. The submariners were unsung heroes, but they paid an inordinate price. Their attacks weakened enemy economies, but each victory came with a deadly risk. A U-boat could sink an entire convoy, but a destroyer could strike back in minutes. In the Pacific, submarines like the USS Barb destroyed Japanese fleets, but the loss of the USS Trigger showed how quickly fortunes could change. The men knew the odds, but they kept going, driven by duty or hope. Their names, etched on plaques or lost at sea, are a testament to their sacrifice, an echo in the depths that still resonates. Chapter 2: The Bomber Pilots. Being a bomber pilot or crew member in World War II was like flying into a hell in the sky, where every mission was a game of Russian roulette played at 30,000 feet. Heavy bombers, such as the American B-17, the B-24 Liberator, the British Lancaster, or the German Heinkel He-111, were towering machines designed to level cities and factories, but their crews faced some of the highest mortality rates of the war. In the U.S. 8th Air Force, 60 to 70% of airmen did not complete their required 25 missions due to casualties or capture. In the British RAF, night bomber crews had a survival probability of only 44% after 30 missions. These men, often young men between the ages of 19 and 25, lived in a world of freezing cold, anti-aircraft fire, and enemy fighters, where a single mistake or stroke of bad luck could turn their plane into a burning grave. This chapter explores the lives of these airmen, from the camaraderie in the cockpit to the terror of facing flak and fighters, a journey where the sky was as deadly as the battlefield. The life of a bomber crew member began long before takeoff, at air bases in England, Germany, or the Pacific, where the tension was palpable. The crews, 7 to 10 men depending on the aircraft, trained as a unit: pilots, navigators, bombardiers, gunners, and radio operators, each with a critical role. In AB-17, the pilot and co-pilot navigated the plane through storms and attacks. The navigator plotted routes on precarious maps. The bombardier aligned the Norden site to drop cargo. The gunners, in exposed turrets, engaged enemy fighters, and the radio operator maintained contact with base. Camaraderie was their strength, forged over nights of cards and whiskey, but dawn brought reality. A mission list posted in the briefing room, each name a reminder that today could be their last. The men joked to ease their fear, but their eyes betrayed the truth. Every flight was a confrontation with death. The interior of a bomber was a functional chaos, a cramped space filled with wires, dials, and the constant roar of 4 engines. AB-17, nicknamed the Flying Fortress, was 22 meters long, but its fuselage was so narrow that crew members had to crawl to move. Gun turrets, like the ventral ball turret, were glass capsules where gunners huddled, exposed to the cold and bullets. At 30,000 feet, temperatures dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius, freezing fingers and noses despite thermal suits. Oxygen masks, essential at high altitudes, could freeze, leaving men gasping for air. The noise was deafening, forcing them to communicate via intercoms that often failed. Each mission lasted 6 to 8 hours, a tense marathon where the crew watched the skies, knowing that a Messerschmitt fighter or a burst of flak could end it all in seconds. Bombing missions were a deadly ballet. Bombers flew in tight formations like the American fighting box to maximize defensive firepower, but this made them easy targets for anti-aircraft fire, flak. Over cities like Berlin or Tokyo, the sky filled with black clouds of explosions, each capable of shattering a wing or engine. Enemy fighters, like the German Focke-Wulf 190 or the Japanese Zero, attacked in swarms, firing 20mm bursts that pierced the fuselage. Gunners responded with .50 machine guns, but were at a disadvantage. A turret gunner had a 70% chance of being wounded or killed before completing his tour. Pilots struggled to maintain formation, dodging clouds of flak while navigators shouted corrections. Every mission was a test of nerves, with death lurking from every direction. Bomber technology was advanced but treacherous. AB-17 could carry 8,000 pounds of bombs, but its Wright Cyclone engines were prone to catching fire under stress. The Norden gun sight, a miracle of accuracy, required absolute concentration from the bombardier, often under fire. Oxygen and heating systems frequently failed, leaving crewmen shivering or suffocating. Damaged aircraft were common. A single hit to a fuel tank could turn a bomber into a fireball. Crews learned to improvise, repairing snapped wires or putting out fires in mid-flight, but technology was as much an ally as an enemy. A mechanical failure at 30,000 feet far from home was as lethal as an enemy attack, and the men knew it. The enemy was a relentless adversary. The German Luftwaffe deployed fighters and anti-aircraft batteries with deadly precision. In 1943, during the bombing of Schweinfurt, the 8th Air Force lost 60 B-17s in a single day, with 600 men killed or captured. In the Pacific, the Japanese used kamikaze tactics in 1944-45, crashing planes into Allied bombers. The RAF, operating at night, faced searchlights and night fighters, with aircraft like the Lancaster down by 56% during the campaigns over Germany. Crews lived in constant fear of flak, whose splinters could pierce the fuselage and bodies without warning. Survivors described the sound, a dry pop followed by a whistling sound, as like a hammer hitting their nerves, each mission a test of their endurance. Bombing tactics evolved, but at a cost. The Americans relied on precision daytime bombing, but the tight formations made them vulnerable. The British preferred nighttime area bombing, less precise but equally dangerous. Each mission required flying hundreds of miles over enemy territory with limited fuel and oxygen. Navigators used stars and maps to guide them, but one mistake could lead them straight into an air raid fortress. Pilots, like Robert Morgan of the Memphis Belle, became legends for completing 25 missions, but they were the exception. Most failed to make it to 15. The pressure of leading a crew, knowing that one wrong turn could kill them all, was immense, and the pilots carried that weight on every flight. The human cost was devastating. Of the 8th Air Force's 125,000 airmen, 26,000 died and 21,000 were captured. In the RAF, 55,573 bomber crews perished, many incinerated or destroyed in the air. Every plane lost was a tragedy. 10 men, brothers in the cockpit, gone in an instant. Letters found at bases, such as those from a 22-year-old gunner to his mother, spoke of fear and hope, written before a flight that never returned. survivors faced combat fatigue, now known as post-traumatic stress disorder, with nightmares of burning planes. Prisoner of war camps, such as Stalag Luft III, offered a cruel fate for those captured, but many preferred it to a fiery death in the sky. Camaraderie was the crew's anchor. At bases like RAF Scampton or Thorpe Abbotts, the men shared laughter and fears, forging bonds that sustained them. Nicknames like the Lucky Bastard Club, for those who completed their missions, reflected their dark humor. But every loss was a blow. A friend who didn't return, an empty bunk. Crew members clung to rituals, a charm, a photo of a girlfriend, to combat the sense of doom. Faith in their pilot, like Chuck Yeager or Guy Gibson, was their compass, but even the best could fall. The death of Gibson, hero of the Dambusters, in 1944 was a reminder that no one was safe, regardless of skill or fame. The sky itself was an adversary. At 30,000 feet, the cold penetrated the bones, and lack of oxygen could cause a man to faint in seconds. Thunderstorms could blow a bomber hundreds of miles off course, sapping fuel. Fog over bases made landing as dangerous as combat. Crewmen learned to read the sky, but they couldn't control it. An engine failure on takeoff, as happened to the B-24 Lady Be Good in the Libyan desert, could leave a crew stranded or dead. The sky offered breathtaking sights, golden clouds, distant sunrises, but it was also an execution ground, where death came without warning, in the form of flak or an unseen fighter. Bombers were essential to the war effort. Allied attacks on German factories and Japanese cities weakened enemy production, while strategic bombing raids, such as those on Dresden and Tokyo, sought to break morale. But the cost was astronomical. Each mission required the crews to cross a gauntlet of fire, with odds that defied logic. The data is relentless. In 1943, the 8th Air Force lost 1 in 5 aircraft on key missions. The British, bombing at night, faced searchlights that made them easy targets. The crews knew the statistics, but they flew anyway, driven by duty, pride, or the hope of being the exception. Chapter 3: Sappers and Bomb Disposals. In World War II, being a sapper or bomb disposal expert meant walking on the edge of annihilation, where a second of hesitation or a false move meant death. These men, often trained military engineers, were the first to advance through minefields, trenches, and blasted cities, clearing the way for armies with primitive tools and nerves of steel. Sappers, like those in the British Corps of Royal Engineers or American Combat Engineers, faced landmines, booby traps, and fortified obstacles. Bomb disposal experts, especially in the UK during the Blitz, dealt with unexploded shells buried in rubble. Mortality rates were terrifying. On some fronts, such as the Eastern Front, up to 50% of sappers did not survive a campaign. In the UK, disposal teams lost 1 man for every 10 bombs handled. This chapter explores his world, a realm of precision under pressure, where every task was a chess match against death itself. The role of a sapper was to blaze trails where others dared not. In Normandy, Allied sappers cleared mined beaches under German machine gun fire, using rudimentary detectors or, sometimes, just their bare hands. On the Eastern Front, Soviet sappers faced extensive minefields, often advancing at night to avoid snipers. Their equipment was basic: fail-safe metal detectors, bayonets to probe the ground, and explosives to detonate obstacles. Each mine, like the German Teller or the Soviet POMZ, could destroy a corps or a tank. The sappers worked under constant pressure, with the enemy firing and time running out. A mistake not only killed them but could halt an advance, leaving battalions exposed. Their unspoken motto was simple: do it right or don't do it at all, because there would be no second chance. Bomb disposal experts faced a different, but equally deadly hell. During the Blitz of 1940-41, London and other British cities were bombarded with thousands of tons of explosives, many of which failed to detonate on impact. These unexploded bombs, UXBs, could be triggered by the slightest movement, buried in rubble or hung on shattered buildings. Disposal teams, such as those of the Royal Engineers, worked with hand tools, pliers, wrenches, stopwatches, to defuse fuses under the threat of an instant explosion. A 1,000 kilograms bomb could destroy a neighborhood, A time delay fuse could detonate at any moment. In 1940, Lieutenant Robert Davies defused a bomb at St. Paul's Cathedral, earning the George Cross, but many of his colleagues were not so lucky. The casualty rate was high. 1 in 10 disposal experts was killed or seriously wounded. The training of sappers and mine disposal experts was rigorous, but never sufficient. Sappers learned to identify mines by their shape or the sound of a detector, but mines evolved rapidly, with traps such as anti-handling devices that exploded when defused. In the North African desert, British sappers faced Rommel's anti-tank mines, while the Germans grappled with Allied countermeasures. Bomb disposal experts studied German fuse diagrams, but each bomb was unique, with modifications that could fool even the most experienced. Training took place in secure fields, but the battlefield was chaotic. Mud, blood, and fire turned every task into a nightmare. The men relied on instinct, learned through mistakes they couldn't afford to repeat. Technology was both an ally and an enemy. Mine detectors, like the Polish mine detector number 1, were innovative but failed in rocky soil or in the rain. The mines themselves were ingenious. The German S-mine, known as Bouncing Betty, jumped a meter before exploding, throwing shrapnel in all directions. Defusers used basic tools, rope, pulleys, mirrors, to manipulate bombs without detonating them. In the UK, techniques such as piercing a bomb's hull to release the explosive were developed, but this required steady hands under unimaginable pressure. A faulty fuse or an unknown mechanism could trigger the bomb, and the men knew it. Technology saved lives, but it also put them at risk, with each enemy advance complicating their work. The enemy was a cunning adversary, designing traps to maximize damage. The Germans laid mines in unpredictable patterns, mixing anti-tank and anti-personnel mines to trap sappers. On the Eastern Front, the Soviets used improvised mines that exploded at the slightest contact. Unexploded bombs during the Blitz were often deliberately complex, with time delay fuses or anti-handling traps. The Japanese, in the Pacific, buried explosives under sand, where American sappers had to dig under fire. Each minefield or bomb was a deadly puzzle, designed not just to kill, but to terrorize. Sappers and defusers worked knowing that the enemy had planned their demise with surgical precision. Sapper tactics were a balance between speed and stealth. In Normandy, Allied sappers used explosive charges to breach minefields, but this alerted the enemy. On the Eastern Front, Soviet sappers often worked at night, using dim flashlights to avoid detection. Bomb disposal experts, like the British during the Blitz, followed strict protocols, evacuating areas, using ropes to move bombs from a distance, and defusing fuses with precise movements. But time was their enemy. A bomb with a time delay fuse could explode at any moment. A minefield had to be cleared before an advance. The pressure was constant, with generals demanding results and civilians depending on their success. Every task was a race against time, with death as the judge. The human cost was devastating. On the Eastern Front, Soviet sappers suffered losses of 40 to 50% in campaigns like Kursk, where minefields were dense and enemy fire relentless. In the UK, mine clearance teams regularly lost men. In 1940 to 41, hundreds were killed or maimed. Every loss was personal. A sapper who triggered a mine left behind devastated equipment. A failed mine clearance device in London could kill civilians. Letters from these men, found in archives, spoke of fear and determination, written in stolen moments before a mission. Survivors faced deep trauma, with images of explosions and lost comrades seared into their memories. Camaraderie was their lifeline. Sappers worked in small teams, depending on each other for survival. In the desert, British sappers shared cigarettes and dark jokes as they probed the ground. Defusers, often alone on their final task, relied on their support teams, who evacuated areas and prepared equipment. These men formed bonds of brotherhood, forged in shared danger. A sapper who cleared a mine saved his comrades. A defuser who neutralized a bomb protected a town. But every loss was a blow, a reminder that the next one could be anyone. Rituals, a pat on the shoulder, a whispered prayer, were their way of defying fate. The terrain itself was an enemy. In Normandy, the beaches were littered with mines and barbed wire, with the sea and enemy fire adding pressure. At Stalingrad, Soviet sappers worked in frozen ruins, where ice concealed explosives. In the Pacific, American sappers faced steamy jungles, where mines were buried beneath mud. Diffusers in cities like London or Berlin dealt with unstable rubble, where one movement could collapse a building. The environment didn't just complicate their job, it made it deadly. One false step, one miscalculation, and the ground itself became a weapon, mercilessly punishing these brave men. Sappers and defusing technicians were essential to the war. Without them, tanks couldn't advance, troops couldn't land, and cities couldn't be rebuilt. On D-Day, sappers cleared gaps for Allied tanks, enabling the advance in Normandy. On the Eastern Front, Soviet sappers opened paths for the counteroffensive at Kursk. British defusing technicians saved thousands of lives by neutralizing bombs in the Blitz, keeping morale high. But their work was invisible, their sacrifice often forgotten. The statistics are stark. In the Royal Engineers, 1 in 5 sappers was killed in action. In the Pacific, American combat engineers faced similar losses. Their legacy is the clear path, but at a cost few could imagine. Chapter 4. Landing troops on the beaches. In World War II, beach landing troops faced one of the most brutal tasks imaginable, climbing out of a flimsy boat, waist-deep in water, and running into a storm of bullets, mines, and artillery. From D-Day in Normandy to the Pacific landings on Tarawa and Iwo Jima, these soldiers were the spearhead of the Allied invasions, facing casualty rates that could exceed 50% in the first waves. On June 6, 1944, at Omaha Beach, U.S. troops lost more than 2,000 men in hours, many before even reaching the sand. In the Pacific, the Marines on Tarawa suffered 3,000 casualties in 3 days, a third of their force. These young men, often 18 to 22 years old, carried rifles, 30-kilogram backpacks, and a fear that only duty could overcome. This chapter explores their world, a hell of sand and blood where every step was a challenge to death, and courage was measured in seconds under enemy fire. D-Day is the ultimate symbol of their sacrifice. On the beaches of Normandy, Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juneau, Sword, the Allies launched 156,000 men against German fortifications. Plywood Higgins boats, carrying 36 soldiers each, bounced on icy waves as German MG-42 machine guns fired 1,200 rounds per minute. The men vomited from seasickness and terror, clutching their M1 Garand or Lee-Enfield rifles. As the ramps opened, many were cut down before hitting the water, their bodies falling into the surf. Those who reached the beach faced mines, barbed wire, and fortified bunkers. At Omaha, the first waves suffered 90% casualties in some sectors, with soldiers crawling through corpses to reach cover. The blood-soaked arena was a killing field where survival depended on luck and speed. In the Pacific, the landings were equally deadly. On Tarawa in November 1943, U.S. Marines faced coral reefs that stranded boats 500 meters from the beach. The men waded through under Japanese fire, with machine guns and snipers hidden in concrete bunkers. On Iwo Jima in 1945, 70,000 Marines landed on a volcanic island, facing 21,000 Japanese defenders entrenched in tunnels. The first waves lost hundreds within minutes, with the black sand turning into a quagmire of blood. Japanese tactics, honed by years of war, aimed to maximize Allied casualties, with prearranged artillery and crossfire. Every beach was a slaughterhouse, where soldiers advanced knowing that many would not see the sunset. Training prepared these troops, but not enough. At camps like Fort Benning or Plymouth, recruits learned to shoot, climb obstacles, and handle explosives, but nothing simulated the chaos of a beach under attack. Boat drills didn't replicate the 2-meter waves or the weight of soaked gear. American and British soldiers practiced landings, but German defenses, like the Atlantic Wall, were fortresses of concrete and steel. In the Pacific, Marines trained for amphibious assaults, but Japanese reefs and bunkers were unpredictable. Training forged discipline, but on the beach, instinct and camaraderie were what kept the men moving, rushing forward despite the terror that demanded they retreat. The landing troops' equipment was basic but heavy. A D-Day soldier carried a rifle, 200 rounds of ammunition, grenades, rations, and a shovel, all soaked upon exiting the water. Marines in the Pacific carried M1 carbines or Thompson submachine guns, but the weight of the equipment, up to 40 kilos, slowed them down in the sand. Higgins' boats offered little protection, with thin walls that didn't stop bullets. Amphibious tanks, such as the Sherman DD, were often sunk by waves or mechanical failures, leaving soldiers without armored support. Radios, vital for coordination, would get wet and fail, isolating units. Each man relied on his training and his comrades, but the equipment, though functional, was a constant reminder of their vulnerability to the enemy. The enemy was a formidable adversary. In Normandy, German divisions, like the 352nd, were well-trained, with machine guns and 88mm cannons sweeping the beaches. In the Pacific, the Japanese fought to the last man, using attrition tactics from concealed positions. The bunkers, built of reinforced concrete, were nearly impenetrable, with slits that allowed fire without exposing oneself. Snipers, hidden in palm trees or caves, targeted officers and medics to demoralize. Artillery, preset for the beaches, fell with deadly accuracy, while buried mines ripped apart bodies and vehicles. The landing troops were not just fighting men, but against a system designed to annihilate them before they could advance. The landing tactics were bold but risky. On D-Day, the Allies used aerial and naval bombardment to soften the defenses, but many bunkers survived. The first waves, sent out at dawn, absorbed the brunt of the fire, sacrificing themselves so that later waves could advance. In the Pacific, the Marines relied on amphibious boats and naval support, but reefs and tides often left them exposed. Tactics evolved. On Iwo Jima, the Marines used flamethrowers and explosive charges to clear bunkers, but every advance cost lives. Coordination was key, but under fire, units fragmented, leaving soldiers fighting in small groups, improvising to survive. The human cost was staggering. On Omaha Beach, the 2nd Ranger Battalion lost 70% of its men within hours. On Tarawa, the 2nd Marine Regiment suffered 1,000 dead on the first day. Every beach was an instant graveyard, with bodies floating in the surf or strewn on the sand. Letters from these soldiers, found in backpacks or sent home, spoke of fear and hope, written on overcrowded boats before the landing. Survivors faced deep trauma, with images of friends ripped apart by shrapnel seared into their minds. Medics, also on the front lines, died trying to save others, their bravery matched only by their sacrifice. Every man who reached the beach was a miracle, but the price was a decimated generation. Camaraderie was their lifeline. On the transport ships, soldiers shared cigarettes, pictures of girlfriends, and jokes to calm their nerves. On the beach, they covered each other, dragging the wounded despite the fire. The bonds formed in training, at camps like Camp Pendleton or Aldershot, were their strength, turning strangers into brothers. A soldier who fell was a personal loss, a name shouted in the chaos. Rituals, a clap, a cheer, were their way of defying fear. Officers, like Lieutenant John Spaulding in Omaha, led by example, rushing forward even though they knew they could be the first to fall. This brotherhood was what kept them going, even when instinct called for surrender. The terrain was as deadly an enemy as bullets. In Normandy, the beaches were littered with obstacles, steel, studs, mines, barbed wire, designed to stop boats and men. The icy water of the English Channel slowed soldiers, while cliffs offered little cover. In the Pacific, beaches of coral and volcanic sand hampered progress, with caves and tunnels concealing defenders. The tide could trap boats on reefs, leaving men to wade under fire. Mud, blood, and debris turned every beach into a deadly obstacle course, where one false step could trigger a mine or expose you to a sniper. The terrain didn't just challenge, it killed with an indifference that matched that of the enemy. The landing troops were essential to the Allied victory. Without them, Normandy would not have been the turning point in Europe, nor would Iwo Jima have fallen in the Pacific. Their sacrifice opened paths for tanks, infantry, and the liberation of continents. But their work was almost certain sacrifice, with the first waves absorbing fire so that subsequent waves could advance. The statistics are relentless. On D-Day, Allied casualties reached 10,000, with 4,414 confirmed dead. On Tarawa, the Marines lost a third of their force in 76 hours. These men, forgotten in the headlines of the great battles, were the vanguard of freedom, their courage a beacon in the darkness of war. Chapter 5: Spies and Undercover Commandos. In World War II, undercover spies and commandos were human shadows operating behind enemy lines, carrying secrets that could change the course of the war. From British Special Operations Executive (SO) agents to Special Forces commandos and American OSS spies, these men and women faced a constant risk of capture, torture, and execution. SOE, created in 1940 by Churchill to set Europe ablaze, deployed some 13,000 agents, of whom 50% did not return. In occupied France, agents had a life expectancy of 6 weeks. Those captured faced the Gestapo, where death was often a welcome relief after brutal interrogations. Commandos, like the British in operations like the Saint Nazaire raid, suffered casualty rates of 60% or more. This chapter explores their world of stealth, deception, and sacrifice, where every mission was a dance with death, and bravery was measured by the ability to live in constant fear. The role of a spy was solitary and devastating. SOE agents, like Violette Sabo or Nancy Wake, infiltrated occupied France disguised as civilians, carrying messages, organizing sabotage, or coordinating with the resistance. They operated under false identities, memorizing codes and routes, always on the lookout for betrayal. A misplaced accent, a badly forged document, or a suspicious glance at a checkpoint could give them away. Commandos, like those of the British No. 4 Commando, carried out rapid-fire raids against strategic targets, such as ports or radar installations. Their missions, often at night, required surgical precision, but the enemy was always on the alert. Both spies and commandos lived in a state of paranoia, where every shadow could be an informant and every noise a threat. The training was exhaustive, but never sufficient for real chaos. SOE agents learned in secret camps in Scotland or England, mastering cryptography, hand-to-hand combat, sabotage, and parachuting. Women, like Noor Inayat Khan, were trained to operate radios under pressure, sending messages in Morse code while avoiding Nazi detection. Commandos, like those in Operation Chariot, practiced amphibious assaults and demolitions, learning to use explosives. System: clay and knives. The commandos, trained in night combat, used knives for silent raids, while spies relied on concealed pistols. One mistake, an intercepted message, a false step, could mean summary execution. The mortality rate was high. In the SOE, 1 in 2 agents was captured or killed. In the OSS, casualties in covert operations reached 40%. These men and women fought not only against the enemy but against isolation, knowing there was no rescue if they failed. Their work was invisible, but its impact was immense, from sabotage that delayed Nazi divisions to raids that destroyed key infrastructure. The life of a spy was an exercise in constant deception. In occupied France, agents like Odette Sansom posed as civilians, attending secret meetings in cafes or farmhouses. They carried cyanide capsules, a reminder of what was at stake if they were caught. Their equipment was minimal: a portable radio, often hidden in a suitcase, a knife, and forged documents that had to withstand Gestapo scrutiny. Commandos, on the other hand, operated with light military equipment: Sten submachine guns, grenades, plastic explosives, designed for rapid attacks. But the psychological burden was heavier than any weapon: loneliness, mistrust, and the certainty that capture meant torture. Every mission was an act of faith, in themselves and in their cause. The enemy was a relentless adversary, designed to hunt shadows. The Gestapo, with its brutal interrogation techniques, was a nightmare for spies. In France, German roadblocks were unpredictable, with dogs trained to sniff out explosives or radios. In the Pacific, OSS spies faced the Japanese Kempeitai, known for their cruelty. Commandos, like those who attacked the island of Sark in 1942, faced defenses fortified with machine guns and barbed wire. Enemy intelligence was on constant alert, using wiretaps and traders to hunt agents. A captured spy, like Noor Inayat Khan, faced unimaginable torture. A caught commando, as in Operation Muscatine, was summarily executed. Death was a constant companion, lurking on every mission. The tactics of spies and commandos depended on stealth and speed. SOE agents used safe houses, changed identities, and moved at night to avoid detection. Their messages, coded in Morse code, were sent in short bursts to avoid being tracked by Nazi detection vans. The commandos, trained in hit-and-run raids, used inflatable boats or parachutes to attack and disappear. Operation Chariot, the attack on the St. Nazaire dry dock in 1942, saw 600 British commandos destroy a key target, but only 228 returned. Precision was vital. A poorly placed explosive or a badly coded message could compromise an entire resistance network. Their success depended on invisibility, but the risk of exposure was ever present. The human cost was devastating. Of the 3,200 SOE agents sent to France, 1,600 were captured or killed. Women, who made up 15% of the agents, faced additional risks. The Gestapo showed no mercy to gender. Violette Sabo was executed at Ravensbrück after months of torture. In the OSS, agents in the Pacific suffered casualty rates of 40%, often betrayed by locals under duress. Commandos, such as those of the British SAS, lost up to 70% in missions like Operation Bulbasket. Letters from these agents, found in archives, reveal their internal struggle, pride in their mission, but fear of never returning. Survivors bore mental scars, haunted by the faces of lost comrades. Camaraderie was their anchor in the darkness. SOE agents formed bonds with the resistance, sharing scarce food and nights on vigil. Commandos, like those of the Long-Range Desert Group in Africa, relied on small teams, where every man was vital. In training camps, like Beaulieu in England, friendships were forged under pressure, with nicknames and jokes relieving stress. But the loss was personal. A captured agent left a gap in the network. A fallen commando, as in Operation Frankton, left his comrades devastated. Rituals, a clap, a shared secret code, were their way of clinging to humanity in a world of deception and danger. The environment was an additional enemy. In occupied France, spies operated in guarded cities and patrolled forests where a noise could give them away. In the Pacific, commandos navigated steamy jungles, facing malaria and Japanese traps. The climate was unforgiving. Snow in Norway froze commandos. Heat in Burma exhausted agents. Safe houses could be raided, rendezvous points ambushed. The terrain demanded adaptability, with spies memorizing maps and commandos navigating without a compass. Every mission was a test of endurance, where the environment could betray you as quickly as an informant. Spies and commandos were essential to the war effort. SOE agents orchestrated sabotage attacks that delayed Nazi divisions, such as the attack on the Lisbon Bridge in 1943. Commandos destroyed key targets, such as the German radar at Berneval, providing vital intelligence. The OSS in the Pacific helped prepare Allied landings by infiltrating occupied territories. But their work was invisible, their sacrifice often unrecognized. The statistics are stark. In the SOE, 1,600 of 3,200 agents in France did not return. British commandos lost 1,500 men in key raids. Their legacy lives on in the freedom they helped win, but the price was a generation lost in the shadows. The cost of courage in World War II. World War II, from 1939 to 1945, was a cataclysm that marked humanity, claiming between 70 and 85 million lives and leaving scars that still resonate. In this global conflict, the deadliest jobs, U-boat and Allied submariners, bomber pilots, sappers, beach landing troops, and undercover spies, define not just battles, but the human cost of freedom. These men and women, often young men as young as 18 or 20, faced mortality rates that defied logic. 75% for German submariners, 60 to 70% for bomber pilots, and up to 90% in the first waves of landings. Their stories, woven with historical data and personal accounts, are not just of loss, but of a courage that shone through in the darkest moments. This book explores their worlds: steel coffins, burning skies, minefields, bloody beaches, and treacherous shadows, honoring those whose courage changed the course of history. The submariners, trapped on German U-boats or Allied submarines, lived in a claustrophobic hell, where the ocean was both refuge and executioner. With mortality rates as high as 75%, they faced depth charges, mechanical failures, and the crushing pressure of the sea. Each mission was a descent into the abyss, with a ping of sonar like a death beat. Their letters, found in shipwrecks, spoke of love and fear, written on damp bunks under red lights. Their sacrifice weakened enemy economies, but the cost was devastating. 30,000 of 40,000 German submariners and thousands of Allied ones lie at the bottom of the sea. Their legacy is a testament to human resilience, facing the impossible in a world where survival was a miracle. Bomber pilots, flying B-17s, Lancasters, or B-24s, faced skies filled with flak and enemy fighters. With a 60 to 70% casualty rate, each mission was a gamble against flak and the freezing cold at 30,000 feet. Locked in freezing cockpits or glass turrets, the gunners were easy targets, while the pilots struggled to maintain formations under attack. Their attacks devastated enemy factories and cities, but the price was a lost generation. 26,000 8th Air Force airmen and 55,573 RAF airmen perished. Their diaries and photographs, kept at bases, reveal a pride mixed with terror, a reminder that every flight was an act of faith in an unforgiving sky. Sappers and bomb disposal experts were the invisible ghosts of war, clearing paths and neutralizing explosives with trembling hands. In minefields or bombed-out cities, they faced casualty rates of 40 to 50%, where a false step or a faulty fuse meant death. In Normandy, sappers breached under fire. In London, disposal experts risked everything to save neighborhoods from the Blitz. Their tools, primitive detectors, pliers, rope, were insufficient against cunning mines and booby-trapped bombs. Every task was a test of precision, with the weight of Allied and civilian lives on their shoulders. Their sacrifice, often unmedaled, enabled crucial breakthroughs, but their names rarely made headlines. Landing troops on the beaches from Omaha to Iwo Jima ran into walls of fire, with casualty rates that could reach 90% in the first waves. D-Day and Tarawa are monuments to their courage, where young soldiers, burdened with soggy gear, faced machine guns and artillery. Every beach was a slaughterhouse, with blood-soaked sand and bodies floating in the surf. Their bravery opened paths to the liberation of Europe and the Pacific, but the cost was immense. Thousands died within hours, leaving behind broken letters and promises. Their brotherhood, forged on overcrowded boats, sustained them as they raced forward, knowing that many would not see the dawn. Undercover spies and commandos lived in a world of shadows, where capture meant torture and execution. With casualty rates of 50% in the SOE and up to 70% in commando raids, these agents and soldiers operated behind enemy lines, sabotaging and spying with deadly stealth. Women like Violette Sabo and men like those in the British SAS risked everything, carrying radios and explosives under constant threat from the Gestapo or Kempeitai. Their missions, from destroying bridges to passing intelligence, turned battles, but their loneliness was crushing. Captured letters reveal their struggle, pride in their cause, but a longing for the life they left behind. Their legacy is the freedom won in secret, at a cost few could bear. These jobs, though distinct, shared a common thread: sacrifice for a greater purpose. U-boaters sank enemy fleets, bomber pilots weakened industries, sappers blazed trails, landing troops liberated territories, spies destabilized the enemy. But every mission was a potential doomsday, with statistics that defy comprehension: 30,000 German U-boatmen dead, 55,573 RAF airmen lost, 10,000 D-Day casualties. These numbers hide faces, dreams, and shattered families. Their stories, preserved in diaries, letters, and survivor accounts, are a mosaic of humanity, a reminder that the war was fought not just with guns, but with hearts beating under pressure. The environment of these jobs was as deadly as the enemy. The ocean crushed submarines, the sky froze aviators, minefields punished mistakes, beaches were death traps, busy streets, mazes of treachery. The technology, though advanced, radars, bombs, radios, was often treacherous, with malfunctions that could kill as quickly as a bullet. The men and women in these roles relied on their training and camaraderie, but also on luck, a cruel factor in a world where death doesn't discriminate. Their courage was their ultimate weapon, a force that drove them to face the impossible, even when they knew the odds. The impact of these works transcends the war. Submariners demonstrated the power of submarine warfare, bomber pilots redefined aerial warfare, sappers shaped military engineering, landing troops forged historic victories, spies laid the foundation for modern intelligence operations. But their true legacy is human, the resilience in the face of fear, the camaraderie that united strangers, the sacrifice that allowed others to live free. These men and women did not seek glory, they sought to fulfill their duty, often at the cost of everything. Their stories, forgotten on the margins of history, deserve to be told, an echo of valor that resonates in the present. As we close this book, we honor these unsung heroes, whose names lie on plaques, shipwrecks, or simply in the memories of those who loved them. World War II was won by their sacrifices, but the cost was a generation marked by fire, water, and blood. Their letters, their photographs, their stories remind us that freedom comes at a price, paid by those who faced the deadliest labors with a courage that defies time. May their memory live on, a beacon in the darkness, reminding us of the cost of courage and the fragility of peace.